Hello everyone. Today we will start with the new chapter, that is chapter 6, Towns, Traders and Craftspersons. Have you ever wondered what India's town looked like almost 1,000 years ago? Imagine streets filled with traders from different lands, ports buzzing with ships carrying spices and textiles, and craftspersons whose skills made Indian good famous across the world. In this chapter, we will explore how pilgrimage centers like Ajmer and temple towns like Thanjavur grew into bustling urban centers, why traders from Arabia, Persia, and China were so attracted to India's market. The story of craftspersons from the weavers of Bengal to the bronze sculptors of South India, whose creations still amaze us, and how small bazaars, guilds, and ports connected India with the wider world. Now, so let's start with the chapter. Now, in the ancient time, temple served as the core. In medieval India, and temples were not just religious center but also the nucleus of community life. Pilgrims, priests, and devotees were drawn to these temples, making them important urban centers. They also served as they also served economic role. Now temples often became rich landowners through donation from rulers, merchants, and devotees. They managed land, collected produce, and financed trade and craft. Religious festivals attracted traders and pilgrims, boosting the local economy. Now, what was the social and cultural role? Temples supported local artisans such as sculptors, bronze workers, weavers, oil pressers, garland makers, and musicians who supplied goods and services for the ritual. They acted as center of education, cultural patronage, and social gathering. Now, they also were a hub of urban growth. The surrounding area developed into a temple town with markets, residence, rest house, and street filled with traders and pilgrims. Now, for example, Thanjavur, which grew in Chola period, grew around the Brihadeshwar, meaning Raja Rajeshwara temple. Now, Billa Swami, which in Vidisha, Somnath, Gujarat, and Kanchipuram, Tamil Nadu, also became famous temple towns. Now, let's see how temples served as a administrative centers. Now imagine arriving in Thanjavur, the vibrant capital of the Chola kingdom, situated along the banks of the Kaveri river. The city is renowned for the grand Raja Rajeshwara temple, constructed under the reign of King Raja Raja Chola. Its architect, Kunjara Mallan Raja Raja, left his name proudly inscribed on the temple walls. Within its sacred space it stands an enormous Shivalinga serving as the primary object of worship. Near the temple, royal palaces rise with open halls known as mandapas, where the king gathers with his minister to discuss matter of governance. Nearby Barak house, nearby Barak house soldiers who were tasked with guarding the city. Now Thanjavur thrives with bustling markets where merchants trade grains, spices, clothes, and jewelry. Residents draw water from the wells and tanks located throughout the area. Talented weavers from the Salya community are busy at work here, as well as in the nearby town of Urayur, producing fine cotton textile from the king and nobility, and more practical fabric for everyday wear. A short distance away is Swami Malai, a skilled sculptor known as the Sathapatis, who create exquisite bronze statues and large ornamental lamps crafted from bell metal. Now, these towns in medieval India were established primarily as center of administration. They housed the ruler, nobles, officers, and clerks, and served as hub where governance, taxation, and justice were carried out. Now, let's see how Temple Town developed and how it became a pilgrimage center. Now, Thanjavur has served as a prime example of temple town, showcasing how many cities developed in earlier time. In this town, the temple was the focal point not only of religious life but also of local economy. Kings commissioned magnificent temple to honor their deities and generously endowed them with land and wealth. These resources enabled the temple to carry out daily worship, feed priests, and visiting pilgrims and host grand religious festivals. Pilgrims often contributed donation, further increasing the temple's wealth, which was then used to support activities like trade and banking. As temple gained influence, people from various professions, priests, artisans, laborers, and merchants settled in the surrounding areas, to meet the needs of the temple and its visitors. This led to the expansion of temple towns. Some well-known examples include Bhilsa in Madhya Pradesh, Somnath in Gujarat, Kanchipuram and Madurai in Tamil Nadu, and Tirupati in Andhra Pradesh. Beside temple towns, many pilgrimage sites also gradually transformed into town. Vrindavan in Uttar Pradesh and Tiruvannamalai in Tamil Nadu are two such places. Ajmer in Rajasthan is also notable not only for being the former capital of the Chauhan dynasty and later a Mughal provincial center, but also for its spiritual significance. The Sufi saint Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti settled there in the 12th century, attracting devotees from various religious backgrounds. Nearby, the sacred Pushkar Lake has been a revered pilgrim destination for centuries. In essence, temple towns were more than just places of worship. They were dynamic centers where religion, commerce, and culture intersected, significantly contributing to the urban growth of medieval India. Now let's discuss why we think that Tanjavur was a great town. It was the capital of the Chola dynasty. The famous Raja Rajeshwara or Brihadeshwara temple, dedicated to Lord Shiva, stood at its heart, making it a major temple town and pilgrimage center. Tanjavur was the seat of Chola king and their official palaces, officers, and law courts made it an important administrative hub. The temple was a rich landowner, receiving donation from kings and merchants. It supported priests, artisans, weavers, musicians, and dancers, creating jobs and wealth. Surrounding markets thrive with the sale of grain, oil, cloth, and ornament. The town attracted scholars, poets, dancers, and musicians, making it a center of art and learning. Temple rituals and festivals added to its grandeur. So, people regarded Tanjavur as a great town because it combined religious importance, political authority, economic prosperity, and cultural richness, becoming a model town of medieval India. Now, let's learn about the lost wax technique. Bronze is a metal made by mixing copper and tin. Bare metal is a special kind of bronze that has more tin, which helps it make a clear ringing sound like a bell. Now, Chola bronze statues were made using a method called the lost wax technique. First, the statue was shaped out of wax. Then, it was covered with clay and left to dry. After that, the clay covered wax was heated and a small hole was made in the clay. The melted wax was drained out through the hole. Then hot liquid metal was poured into the empty space inside the clay. Once the metal cooled and hardened, the clay cover was removed and the statue was cleaned and polished. This technique allowed fine detailing in ornaments and expression. It produced unique masterpiece. No two statues were identical. It gave statue a smooth, polished finish. It made durable and long-lasting bronze figure. It provided flexibility to create both small and large idols. It provided flexibility to create both small and large idols. Next is a network of small towns. Now, from the 8th century onwards, many small towns began to develop across the Indian subcontinent. These towns often shared as large villages and gradually became important places for trade and craftsmanship. At the center of these towns was a market area called a Mandapika, later called Mandi, where farmers and villagers from nearby areas came to sell their produce. Busy market streets known as the Hatta or Hart were lined with shops selling various goods. Different areas of the town were occupied by skilled workers like potters, blacksmiths, sugar makers, toddy, which is a palm drink, these producers, and stonemasons, each working in their own neighborhood. Some traders lived in the town all the time, while others were traveling merchants who brought in goods from far off places, such as horses, spices, salt, camphor, and saffron. These towns were usually ruled by local leaders known as the Samantas and later Zamidar. They built strong palaces with walls to protect themselves and the town. They collected taxes from the traders, artisans, and the goods being sold. Sometimes they allowed temples, often built or supported by rulers or wealthy merchants, to collect these taxes instead. These tax rights were recorded in stone inscription, many of which can still be seen today. In short, these small towns became active centers where farming, trade, craft, and local government came together, helping them grow and thrive during medieval times. Now let's learn about the taxes on markets. A stone inscription from the 10th century in Rajasthan tells us about the taxes collected by temple officials. They collected taxes on many things like sugar, jaggery, dyes, thread, cotton, coconuts, salt, areca nut, butter, sesame oil, and cloth. They also collected taxes from traders and people who sold metal goods, made alcohol, produced oil, sold cattle food, and carried grain. Some taxes were some taxes were paid by giving the actual goods, while others were paid in money. These taxes help the temple pay for religious activity, take care of pilgrims, and keep the temple building in good shape. This shows that the temple were important not only for religion but also for local economy. Today, market taxes are mainly collected by local government bodies like municipalities and panchayat. These include license fees, vendor charges, and GST. Taxes are collected both online and offline. The money is used to maintain market areas, provide sanitation, improve infrastructure, and support vendors through public services. Next is traders, big and small. Now, in medieval India, different groups were involved in trade. For example, the Manjaras were known for transporting goods, especially horses. Horse trading was important, and the traders often formed associations led by experienced leaders who made deals with warriors and rulers. Because travel was dangerous, meaning it was long distance forest and there were multiple forests. Because travel was dangerous because of the long distance, forest, and multiple kingdom, traders traveled in group called caravan or in Hindi karwa for safety. To protect their businesses and improve trade, many traders formed guild, organized group that managed business affairs. In South India, two major guilds from the 8th century were Manigramam and Nana Desi, which also traded with places like China and Southeast Asia. Now, some communities became famous for their trade, such as Chettiars, who are mainly from Tamil Nadu, Marwadi Oswal, who were mainly from Rajasthan, Gujarati traders, including Hindu Banyas, Muslim Bohras. These groups did both domestic and international trade, connecting India with regions like Red Sea, Persian Gulf, East Africa, and more. So, what goods were traded? India exported textile, especially cotton, spices like pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg. And what was the import? Gold, ivory, tin, and Chinese pottery. Now, due to this, cultural exchange took place and foreign traders came to India. The west coast of India, like Kerala, became a hub where Arab, Persian, Chinese, Jewish, and Syrian Christian traders lived and did business. Indian goods were highly valued in Europe, and the Italian trader would buy Indian spices and sell them in European markets for high profits. Now, the high demand for Indian spices and textile in Europe eventually attracted European traders to come to India. This marked the beginning of major change, leading to the urban growth and the eventual colonization of parts of India by European powers. With people and goods moving across vast distances during this period, life in towns and villages must have been buzzing with activity. But what kind of changes did this vibrant trade bring to everyday life? How did it shape community, work, and culture? Imagine the street of medieval town, bustling markets, colorful goods, and the artisan busy at work. During medieval times, the expensive movement of people and goods through trade had a deep influence on the everyday lives of those living in both towns and rural area. It would have led to more employment opportunities as demand for various produce grew. Artisan, weavers, and craftsmen found increased work. Farmers and villagers also benefited by gaining access to wider market where they could sell their crops and handmade goods. It led to the growth of cities like important trading centers and port towns such as Surat, Masulipatnam, and Calicut expanded rapidly, evolving into busy urban hubs. To accommodate traders and travelers, facilities like inns, marketplaces, and storage warehouses were established. Trade led to cultural blending. The arrival of foreign merchants brought fresh ideas, new religions, languages, and customs, enriching the social fabric of towns and creating diverse multicultural communities. Now, town residents enjoyed luxury items like fine pottery, gold ornaments, and rich textile imported through trade. The wealth generated also supported the building of schools, temples, and the flourishing of arts. Now, trade guilds played a vital role in protecting the interest of local producers and craftsmen. Beyond business, these guilds contributed to community welfare by funding essential infrastructure such as water reservoir, rest houses, and educational institutions. Now, I have talked about one part of the question, which was what impact do you think this would have had on the lives of people in towns and villages? Now, it's your turn to think about the other bit, which is make a list of artisans living in towns. Read about Kabul, which was used to be major trading hub. Kabul, which is now the capital of Afghanistan, became an important place for both politics and trade starting in 16th century. Next is crafts in towns. Craftspersons were vital to medieval Indian society. They not only created beautiful and useful items, but also helped build cities, supported religious institutions, and shaped the economy through their skilled labor. During medieval times in India, many skilled artisans became well known for their craftsmanship and played a significant role in both society and the economy. For example, in the town of Bidar, located in present-day Karnataka, craftsmen were famous for a special kind of metalwork called bidri. This art involved decorating metal objects by embedding silver and copper designs, and it took its name from the town itself. Over time, towns in India experienced ups and downs in their importance and size. Some grew into major cities, while others lost their influence. For example, Ahmedabad in Gujarat developed into a major commercial city known for trade and business. On the other hand, Thanjavur, which was once a flourishing town, declined in importance over the centuries. Another example is Murshidabad in West Bengal, located along the Bhagirathi River. It became well known in the early 1700s for its silk production and even became the capital of Bengal in 1704. However, as the century went on, Murshidabad lost its importance. This was mainly because English factories began producing cheap, machine-made clothes that outcompeted Indian hand-woven silk, leading to a decline in local weaving and trade. A community known as Panchalas or Vishwakarma included various skilled workers such as goldsmith, blacksmith, bronze worker, mason, and carpenter. They were essential in constructing temples but also contributed to building palaces, large public buildings, and important water structures like tanks and reservoirs that served both cities and villages. Weavers from groups like the Saliyar, Kaikolaras, which is mentioned here, became prosperous and respected members of society. Some were wealthy enough to donate generously to temples, demonstrating their success. As time passed, the process of making cloth became more specialized. Different tasks such as cleaning cloth, spinning thread, and dyeing fabric became separate craft, with artisans focusing on and mastering each individual step. Let's take a closer look at some of the cities like Hampi, Masulipatanam, and Surat. First, let's take Hampi. Hampi, located in the basin of Krishna and Tungabhadra rivers, was the capital city of Vijayanagar Empire, which was established in 1336 CE. The remains of Hampi today reveal that it was a well-fortified and thoughtfully designed urban center. One of the remarkable features of its fortification is that the city walls were constructed without using any cement or mortar. Instead, the builders skillfully interlocked stones to create strong and durable defenses. The architectural style of Hampi stands out for its grandeur and intricate design. The royal building featured spacious halls supported by pillars, arches, and domes, with detailed sculptures adorning the spaces. The city also had carefully laid out gardens and orchards, decorated with artistic carvings such as lotus motif and carved stones supports known as corbels. During the 15th and 16th century, Hampi emerged as a bustling hub of trade and culture. It attracted a diverse group of traders, including Muslim merchants, the Chitti community, the Europeans like the Portuguese, who actively engaged in commerce within its market. Temples in Hampi were not only places of worship but also centers for cultural activities. For instance, at the Virupaksha temple, temple dancers called Devdasis performed regularly, entertaining both the royal court and the common people. One of the major festivals celebrated in Hampi was Mahanavami, which corresponds to the modern-day Navratri festival in South India. Archaeological evidence shows a special platform where the king would host guests. receive tributes, and enjoy various cultural programs such as music, dance, and wrestling. The decline of Hampi began after the Vijayanagar Empire suffered a decisive defeat in 1565 at the hands of the combined forces of Deccan Sultanate, rulers of Golconda, Bijapur, and Ahmednagar, Berar, and Bidar. Following this defeat, Hampi was abandoned and gradually fell into its ruin. Next come to the next city, Surat. Now during the Mughal era, Surat in Gujarat rose to prominence as a key trading port and earned the title Emporium of Western Trade. Alongside Cambay, known as Khambat, and Ahmedabad, Surat acted as a vital gateway linking India to West Asia through the Gulf of Hormuz. It was also known as the Gate of Makkah because many Muslim pilgrims embarked on their sea journey to Mecca from this port. Surat was unique for its diverse and multicultural population, where people from different castes, religions, and countries lived and worked together. By the 1600s, European powers such as the Portuguese, Dutch, and English had established trading posts and warehouses in the city. An English traveller named John Ovington, visiting in 1689, observed that Surat's harbour was bustling with around 100 ships from various parts of the world at any given time. The city's economy thrived on its production of cotton textiles, especially those embellished with gold thread borders called zari. These fabrics were exported extensively to regions like West Asia, Africa, and Europe. Surat was also home to numerous shops and a well-developed banking system. Wealthy merchant families such as Kathiawar Sheths or Mahajans managed large banking operations. Surat's hundis or traditional financial instrument were highly trusted and used in far-off markets including Cairo and Basra, which is in Iraq, and Antwerp, city in Belgium. However, Surat's importance began to wane towards the 17th century. The decline of the Mughal Empire weakened trade, Portuguese control over sea route limited its access, and rising competition from Bombay, especially after the English East India Company shifted its base there in 1668. Further diminishing Surat's standing. Despite this downturn, Surat has since revived and today stands as a thriving commercial city once again. Next is Masulipattnam. Now, Masulipattnam, also called Machilipatnam, meaning fish port town, was located on the delta of the Krishna River and became an important trading port during the 17th century. It was one of the busiest ports along the Andhra coast and attracted traders from Europe, including the Dutch and the English East India Company, both of whom sought to control the port due to its strategic and economic importance. The Dutch even went as far as building a fort to protect their commercial interests there. The region around Masulipattnam was ruled by the Qutub Shahi dynasty of Golconda, who wanted to keep a stronghold on trade. To do this, they established royal monopolies, meaning that certain goods like spices and textile could only be sold by the king's official, limiting the freedom of European traders. Now, trade in Masulipattnam was carried out by a variety of groups: local Golconda nobles, Persian merchants, Telugu, Komati, Chettis, and European traders. This mix of communities made the city prosperous and lively. However, the political situation changed when the Mughal Empire expanded southwards. Mir Jumla, the Mughal governor and a merchant, took advantage of the competition between the Dutch and English traders. In 1686 and 87, Emperor Aurangzeb conquered Golconda, bringing Masulipattnam under Mughal control. After the Mughal takeover, the English East India Company realized that merely having a trading port was not enough. They wanted to establish centers that could serve as political and administrative headquarters. They shifted their focus to cities like Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras, which were better suited for this purpose. This shift causes the Masulipattnam to lose its importance and gradually decline, becoming a quiet town by the 18th century. Now the next topic is new towns and traders. During the 16th and 17th century, Indian spices and textile became highly sought after in Europe and West Asia, prompting European powers like the Dutch, English, and French to establish East India companies. These companies were large trading organizations aimed at expanding their commercial reach in India and the East. Now, Indian initially powerful merchants like the Mullah Abdul Ghaffar and Virji Vohra, who owned fleets of ships, competed strongly with European traders. However, over time, European companies leveraged their naval strength to dominate maritime trade. This shift forced many Indian traders to become intermediaries or agents for the European companies, losing their autonomy. Among the European, the English emerged as the most successful, extending their influence beyond commerce and into political control over India. Now, what was its effect on weavers and artisans? The growing demand for Indian textile led to a rise in employment in various sectors related to craft like spinning, weaving, bleaching, and dyeing. While Indian textile design became more elaborate and refined, the independence of weavers diminished. They were compelled to accept advance payments from European agents and produce fabric following the designs dictated by these companies, which curtailed their creative freedom and economic independence. The growth of the new cities led to the social division. In the 18th century, cities such as Bombay, which is Mumbai, Calcutta, and Madras, which is Chennai, expanded rapidly as major trade hubs. The European trading companies established segregated zones within these cities, known as black towns, where Indian merchants and artisans were required to live and work. These areas were distinctly separated from the white towns, where European officials and colonists reside, such as Fort St. George in Madras and Fort St. William in Calcutta. This segregation reflected and reinforced clear social and racial division during colonial rule. Let's learn about two famous explorers, Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus. In the 15th century, spices were in huge demand in Europe and West Asia. Since land routes were long and risky, European explorers set out on dangerous sea voyage to find a direct route into India, where many spices came from. One of the most famous explorers was Vasco da Gama, a Portuguese sailor. In 1498, he sailed around Africa's southern tip, which is called as Cape of Good Hope. He crossed the Indian Ocean and reached the Calicut, now Kozhikode, on the western coast of India. His journey was extremely tough. Only 54 out of 170 men survived, and 2 ships were lost. Still, it was a big success because it opened the first direct sea route between Europe and India, making trade faster and more profitable. This route encouraged other European powers like the English, Dutch, and French to follow and start their own expedition to India. Around the same time, in 1492, Christopher Columbus set sail too. He believed the earth was round and thought he could reach India by going west across the Atlantic Ocean. But he made a huge mistake in geography. Instead of India, he landed in Caribbean island, which he mistakenly called the West Indies, because he thought he had reached India. This mistake led to the discovery of new lands like North, Central, and South America, and eventually the colonization of those regions by Spanish and Portuguese conquerors, which sadly included the destruction of many indigenous communities. This 15th century exploration created direct sea connection between Europe and India, which boosted trade and also triggered European colonization of the America. As a result, the world saw massive change in global trade, power, and politics, many of which shaped the modern world. Now let's start with the exercise. First one is fill in the blanks. The Rajarajeshwara temple was built in Thanjavur. Ajmer is associated with the Sufi saint Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti. Hampi was the capital of the Vijayanagar Empire. The Dutch established the settlement at Masulipatam in Andhra Pradesh. Now the next we have to tell whether the statement are true or false. First one is, we know the name of the architect of the Rajarajeshwara temple from an inscription, which is true. And the architect was Kunjara Mallan Rajaraja. Now the next is, merchants prefer to travel individually rather than in caravans. That statement is false because they traveled in caravan for safety. Now the third is, Kabul was a major trade center. Kabul was a center for trade in elephant. It is a false statement because Kabul was known for horses, camels, precious stones, not elephants. Now the last one is, Surat was an important trading port on the Bay of Bengal. Now it is false because Surat was on the west coast and Arabian Sea, not Bay of Bengal. Now the next question is, how was the water supplied to the city of Tanjavur. The main source of water for Tanjavur was the river Kaveri. In addition, the city had a network of tanks and wells to store and distribute water. This system ensured a steady supply for drinking, household needs, irrigation, and temple rituals. Now, the next is who lived in the black towns in cities such as Madras. Now, in cities like Madras, during the colonial period, the black towns were settlements where native Indian traders, artisans, weavers, and workers lived. These areas were usually outside the fort. For example, Fort St. George in Madras, which was reserved for the British and European merchants. The division reflected the social and racial segregation under colonial rule, meaning white towns were reserved for European and black towns for Indian. Now the next question is, why do you think towns grew around temples? Now let's see the religious importance. Temples were great center of pilgrim and devotion, drawing pilgrims, priests, and temples were great centers of pilgrimage. Temples were great center of pilgrimage and devotion, drawing pilgrims, priests, and scholars from far and wide. Now it served as economic role. Temples became wealthy landowners due to royal grants and donation. They financed farming, trade, and supported priests, workers, and service communities, encouraging settlements nearby. Now, artisans such as bronze sculptors, stone carvers, weavers, garland makers, and oil pressers settled near temple to supply items for rituals and festival. And market emerged around temple complexes, making them commercial hubs. Now, temples were also center of learning music, dance, and cultural gathering. Festivals attracted traders and pilgrims, adding to their importance. Now, some famous temple towns are Thanjavur, which was Chola capital. It was famous for its Raja Rajeshwara temple. Now, Somnath, which is in Gujarat, it was major pilgrimage and trading town. Kanchipuram, Tamil Nadu, it was a center of learning and Shaivite worship. Now, Billa Swamin, which is in Vidisha, Madhya Pradesh, it developed around a temple dedicated to Lord Vishnu. Now, the next is how important were craft persons for the building and maintenance of the temple. Now, craft persons were vital for both the construction and upkeep of temples. Stone carvers, sculptors, bronze workers, weavers, painters, and goldsmiths created idols, carved pillars, decorated walls, and supplied ornaments. And other thing also like clothes and ritual items. Even after construction, they ensured temples remained center of worship by maintaining images, producing offering, and preparing items for festival. And the next is, why did people from distant land visit Surat? Now, Surat was one of the most important Mughal port town on the western coast. It was called the gateway to the west, famous for textile, especially cotton and zari work, which were in high demand in West Asia and Europe. Ships from the Red Sea, Persian Gulf, and Southeast Asia visited Surat for trade. It was a departure point for Hajj pilgrims going to Makkah. The Portuguese, Dutch, English, and French all had trading houses and warehouses in Surat. This made it a hub of international trade and cultural contact. Now the next is, in what ways the craft production in cities like Calcutta different from that in cities like Thanjavur? Now let's do a comparative study. Now Thanjavur, it developed around Chola period, around 11th century. Now Calcutta was a colonial port city. It developed around 18th and 19th century. In Thanjavur, nature of craft production was temple based, and artisan made bronze idol, stone carving, metalwork, cloth for rituals. But in Calcutta, nature of craft production was demand based. Now factories, workshop, textile mills produce goods for export. Now for the Thanjavur, patronage was given by kings, pilgrims, and temples. But for the Calcutta, it was controlled by British East India Company and colonial traders. Now in the Thanjavur, organization of craft was by guilds and local artisans who worked independently or under temple patronage. Now in Calcutta, factory system replaced traditional guild, artisan work under European supervision. Now in Thanjavur, market was mainly regional and religious, but in Calcutta it was international, meaning goods went from India to Europe, Southeast Asia, China through colonial shipping. Now In Thanjavur, artisans' status was they respected as part of the temple culture with stable livelihood. But in Calcutta, they lost their autonomy. Many artisans became wage workers in colonial industries. Now, in the next video, we will discuss new chapter, that is chapter 7, tribes, nomads and settled communities. Thank you.